Hey, what's up, Liron here. Today I'm going to show you how to create a fantastic, realistic impression in watercolor in black and white. We're going to play, it's all about the nuances of value here. So I'm going to start with this person's face, a violinist, a beautiful scene, if you will, that I really enjoyed. And after painting for so long in color, this has been very refreshing to me because all you really have to focus on is water, paint, how much water, how much paint, how you place them together, what they look like together. So we're going to get started with the eyebrow and this area of the eye that is quite dark. And looking at the reference, there are some interesting things going on there. Now, I'm going to completely ignore the background, if I'm being honest. The dark background for now, we're just going to focus on the face. Now, I am also simplifying quite a bit, but I want you to notice how the more details we add, the more context is built, the more realistic it's gonna look, okay? Now, when you're painting this small, and you can probably tell this is the size of my hand, the paper is not too big, it gives you a lot of time to work with the paint. One of the things to notice is how wet the paint is on paper, and you can tell if you look at the bead and how the water pools, you can develop that sense of figuring out how wet it is and how much you can work with it and what you can do with it. So for example, I'm expanding that shadow on the right side of the forehead into the middle of the forehead using clean water with the idea of this area needs to be light but not paper white. So if I just connect it a bit, the paint is gonna very gently fill in the area, and I'm gonna get a smooth transition. Now, onto the right side of the face, mostly I'm painting around that bit of a highlight there on the edge of the cheek. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna soften it around that line where light turns to shadow and just move on with my wash and keep it around that side of the nose. Now, one thing to remember, it's very easy to darken, right? So I'm erring on the side of being a little lighter to get a bit of a better flow and just letting things fall into place. I'm looking at what's going on paper. This is me coming back with a damp brush, softening a bit of the edge of the shadow there. And if you work that way, you have time. You have a lot of time. And in fact, I will encourage you to, there's a point in this video where I think I'm achieving the highest level of a realistic impression with black and white watercolor. Make sure you watch that bit. It's gonna be around the arms, okay? But I encourage you to give it a try and see if you can give yourself time, work in a very slow, almost meditative way. Not because I'm telling you to do that, but because you're just giving yourself fully to the process. You're just focusing on what you're doing this very moment. This is one of the things I noticed when I'm at my best, when my paintings are at their best, is when I simply give my all to it. If you've ever done anything where you were super focused on it, you were hyper focused, you were just, that was the only thing on your mind, whether it's sports, playing a musical instrument, because some people do come from a different field of art or from sports or from whatever. You may have had this experience before where everything disappears. All that matters is the tip of the brush and what it's doing on paper this very moment. And it's very elusive in a way because people think they have to prepare for everything and focus on everything that's going on and figuring out that shape I'm painting right now, how does it connect with the context to the rest of the painting, and being worried about the edges all the time. Whereas if you just let the painting carry you, let the thing that is going on paper carry you and actually observe what's going on, you will paint everything perfectly, and I mean that. So yes, I'm continuing with the hair, pretty simple, just dark. I added too much of it on that side, so it looks like a weird haircut. His hair is actually much more graceful. But yeah, moving into the color of the shirt, I'm just going with a dark paint. Again, my colors merge very freely. Not necessarily because I'm trying to merge them, but because I'm just painting. I'm placing paint on paper. Now you want to pay attention, because this to me is probably the best bit I can at least notice. So I'm pre-wetting this area, and what I'm going to do is come back with slightly darker paint to establish the shadow. But look at what's gonna happen now. I'm gonna mix very, very dark paint. And as we get to this area right there, I'm gonna start establishing the core shadow. This is the darkest area because the edge of the arm has some reflected light on it. So what happens in effect is we have a transition from light to dark, and then within the shadow, we have some reflected light, making the edge of the arm a little lighter. So that ends up with a very dark shadow in the middle of that lower half of the arm. And it's just a very interesting thing to observe. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Reflected light is everywhere. It's a subtle effect, but once you're familiar with it, it can do wonders to your paintings. Not because you change how you paint, but because you see it. And when you're seeing it, you're able to incorporate it into your work. And I think the fingers are a wonderful example of how you really don't have to paint gracefully or beautifully. It really is about placing paint on paper. So I started dark, and then I'm coming back with the light paint to make that smooth, rounded transition. Same with this finger. Started dark, now I'm coming back and softening it with a damp brush. How damp? And now I'm doing the other way around. So I wanted to show you. I pre-wet and then I come back with some paint. So I'm alternating. What's important to me is not how I paint, but what I do, what my vision is, what the story I'm telling is. And the way to get there is almost a byproduct of just wanting to get there. That the fact that I have this impression in my mind, or this vision, or this inspiration coming from this photo is the vehicle to find my way for me. So I don't have a preconceived plan. I don't have a way I'm thinking of doing this or that. What I have is what I want to do, and that alone is the vehicle that carries me to my result. The in-between details are trivial. Doesn't really matter if I first pre-wet and then do wet and wet, or if I first paint a shape and then smoothen the edge. All of this doesn't matter. Now, one more moment to pay attention to, because this spot in particular, I absolutely love how this arm turned out, and you're gonna see all the nuances. What you're seeing here is a lot of highlights that express the tendons and muscles, very gentle muscles running across that lower arm. And there is, again, this thing with, if you know it, you'll recognize it. And if you recognize it, you will be able to paint it. And this is exactly what's going to happen in a second. We're starting with the fingers like before. And you'll notice on the fingers as well, there's reflected light. So there is a light part to the left. Then there is a slight transition to dark. Then there's the core shadow, the darkest. But look at what's happening, especially on his middle finger, the one that's placed on the violin strings. Look at that sliver of slightly lighter shape there. That, I love it. Now, the one mistake I made here is this, what I just painted. This shape is a little too dark, and that's fine. It's not the end of the world, but it will pop up a bit too much. And this is the easiest thing to fix, by the way. I just didn't even notice it. The core shadow here is a little too strong, just a bit. Doesn't hurt the overall impression, but as the person who painted it, I have to notice it. It's impossible for me not to. Now we're getting to that beautiful part of nuances with the muscles and tendons, and the entire shape of light and shadow hints at a three-dimensional form, right? And you don't have to know what three-dimensional form you're painting. You can just paint it as you see it, or you can know what you're painting, and then that informs your decisions as well. It doesn't really matter. Whatever works for you, everyone has to find their own switches of inspiration. To me, it's kind of a bit of column A, a bit of column B. I do both. I rely on both. But look at this core shadow here. To me, this is one of my favorite spots of the painting because it has everything. It has smooth transitions, it has highlights, it has dark shadows, it has mid values, it has sharp transitions, again, smooth transitions, it has everything. It has wet and wet, it has wet on dry. This arm alone encapsulates the full range of what you can do with watercolor, technique-wise. Now, the reason I chose this technique or that technique is just a byproduct of where I'm going. I want this to be dark. I want this to be a smooth transition. I want this to be a hard transition. The arm just, the hand, it just does that. And you'll be surprised at how little technique you need to produce something beautiful. It really doesn't take much. this is why you can, as a really greenhorn beginner, just paint some standout painting that you weren't expecting to. That happened to me several times with the Godfather actors. If I find it, I'll place it where around, what timestamp is it? 10:19. I'm gonna write it down for myself. That was just, wow, blew my mind how I was able to paint something like that so early into watercolor, and then the next day paint a complete piece of crap of a landscape. Because it has nothing to do with technique. It has everything to do with perception, motivation, inspiration, and observation, if I haven't mentioned that. Perception, I said, so observation, it's the same. If you can see it, if it moves you to paint it, you'll create something cool, even if you're not technically sound, even if your painting is bad from a technique standpoint. We've all seen these watercolors where it's clear the artist has no watercolor technique, but they paint like 3 other mediums and it looks perfect. That's how it happens. It really isn't about technique. Now I'm gonna paint his shirt. It's fully dark, just black. This is gonna be the darkest bit of the painting. It's gonna frame up all the highlights we've had so far. And as we switch over to where the arm casts a shadow, and you can see it in the reference photo, I'm just gonna remix some dark paint, but I'm not gonna fall over myself trying to mimic the 9 out of 10 value and the 8 out of 10 value, like the very, very dark and a little bit less dark. I'm just capturing it all in one go. You know, he has this, whatever, necklace and some rings on it, it appears. I completely missed what these are. I just painted what I was seeing at the moment, very zoned in and very zen mode. But that's what they are, apparently. And yeah, I'm just painting the shirt. After that, we'll add some details to the violin and we're done with this. And I want you to pay especially close attention to the arms. I could have gone darker. Again, my technique even here isn't perfect. You can see some backgrounds and some weird effects, but the thing is, it tells the story, right? And yes, had I painted maybe larger even, would have made it a little more sound, would give me more room to get the nuances of all the forms. There are plenty of things you can do to turn it from a 7 out of 10 into a 9 out of 10. But what I'm telling you is there is so much you can do to make your 4 out of 10 into a 7 out of 10 just by seeing, perceiving, allowing yourself to find your inspiration instead of dictating to yourself like a bad boss. This is what you should do, and this is how you should paint it. Paint this scene that this artist demonstrates on YouTube, like I'm doing here. If you look at the painting and the scene itself, the subject matter doesn't inspire you, don't paint it. You can enjoy the chit-chat, you can enjoy the insights, but don't paint this. Don't make a repeat of this. Find something else you like. And you can make it as similar or as different. Like if maybe there's a different subject you like and you're gonna paint that in black and white. And that's perfectly fine. Maybe you're gonna paint something in color and you don't even care about black and white. That's also fine. Look at this negative painting of the darks between the fingers. Really gonna put the fingers in a good perspective and in terms of the values. So yeah, don't do what I do. Don't do what I do. Don't listen to anything I say necessarily. It's all about finding your own switches. Look at this light touch there, eyebrow, eye, immediately makes the details pop, makes them make more sense. Same gonna be, I think, for the mustache and some in the shadow especially. These very light touches that take this to its completed form. I messed up the shape of the hair a bit, but that's fine. I can even fix that. Doesn't really matter. We're gonna sign this and I'm gonna share with you the final result. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, check out my courses, links below. Frustration-free watercolor course, the watercolor realism course, which is more like what we've done in this video. Also the cars book, if you want to get an art book. I actually have an art book, a book that's purely about the art, not a how-to, with 100 car paintings, even more than 100. Check that out in the description as well. I want to thank everyone who supports me over on Patreon. You make this possible. You help keep the lights on here. This is how we feed Ruth. Thank you so much for checking out my work. If you want a painting, go over to lirongallery.com. I'm toying around with the idea of almost removing half of them and updating the price and doing a lot of changes. I think now is a good time to check that out. In any case, thank you. I will see you in the next vid. Take care.